In the exhilarating world of MotoGP and touring car series, Gregg Hansford was more than just a racer. He was a legend, a man who mastered two entirely different machines at the highest level the sport had to offer, winning World Championship Grand Prix races on a motorcycle and then crossing to four wheels and winning at Bathurst, something nobody before him had ever done and nobody since has managed to repeat. However, in 1995, during the Australian Super Touring Championship, when odds were finally in his favor, fate took a cruel turn. Join us as we journey through the life of Gregg Hansford from his early success in motorsport to his last race. Gregg Hansford was born on April 8, 1952 in East Brisbane, Queensland, as the third of four children and the only son in the family. But sadly, his father, who had played rugby union for Queensland, died when he was just 15, leaving his mother Mona to raise the family on her own. When Gregg showed a serious enough interest in motorcycle racing in his late teens, it was his mother who reached into her own pocket to give him the money to get started. Growing up in Brisbane, Gregg attended Milton State School, then the Anglican Church Grammar School, and finished at Brisbane State High School in 1969. After graduation, he went to work as a motorcycle mechanic, spending his days taking machines apart and putting them back together again until he understood every piece of them. And by 1971, he had saved enough to start racing, beginning on dirt tracks and motocross circuits around Queensland before finding his way to road racing in the early 1970s, where his natural talent quickly started to stand out. A pivotal moment came when John Taylor at Brisk Sales noticed him and gave him a Kawasaki H1R to race, which led to an offer from the Brisbane Yamaha distributor Annand and Thompson. He made a name for himself around Queensland for what he could do at Lakeside International Raceway near Brisbane, where his precision and braking ability made him almost impossible to beat. Then, in 1974, Annand and Thompson put him on a brand new Yamaha TZ750 and sent him to the Daytona 200 for his international debut. But sadly, his motorcycle suffered ignition problems, which forced him out of the race before the finish. Undeterred, he came home and went straight to Mount Panorama, where he and his rival Warren Willing put on a race that people in Australian motorsport still talk about 50 years later. Although Willing ended up winning by the smallest of margins, Gregg won enough other rounds to claim the 1974 Australian National Championship at the age of 21. And a year later, Kawasaki Australia assigned him, and alongside Murray Sale, he won 29 races from 31 starts that year. In fact, by 1977, Motorcourse had rated him the number 5 rider in the world, and he had not yet ridden in a single World Championship Grand Prix. In 1978, Gregg finally made his transition to the World Championship, where he initially had to face many hurdles regarding his entry, but once he finally secured a ride, he wasted no time securing victory in both 250cc and 350cc races at the French Grand Prix. Moreover, he ended the season with 7 Grand Prix victories, losing the 250cc world title to Ballington by just 6 points. Sadly, his motorcycle career ended in Belgium in 1981, when improperly replaced brake calipers failed at high speed and he hit a car parked by a marshal in an escape road, breaking the same femur he had fractured at Imola earlier that year. After months and months of rehabilitation, Hansford returned to Brisbane and opened motorcycle dealerships and a watercraft shop on the Gold Coast, and tried to settle into a life away from racing. However, knowing Gregg, that didn't last long. His competitive nature just wouldn't allow it, and in 1982 he walked into Allan Moffat Racing and announced he wanted to drive touring cars. He worked his way up, letting the results do the talking, and in 1993, alongside Larry Perkins in a Holden Commodore, he won the Bathurst 1000. By 1995, life finally seemed to be falling into place with a son at home, not yet old enough to walk, and a wedding planned for April. But sadly, he would never make it to his wedding. The 1995 Australian Super Touring Championship season hadn't even properly started when Gregg Hansford arrived at Phillip Island on the morning of March 5th. He was 42 years old, and for the first time in 7 years, he had a full-time drive and not a borrowed seat at Bathurst. Ross Palmer Motorsport had signed him to race Ford Mondeo Ghia across the entire Super Touring season, and Hansford was genuinely happy about it. His friend and fellow driver John Bowe, who spoke to him 2 or 3 times a week by phone, said that Gregg had been hankering for exactly this kind of opportunity for a long time. He spent the better part of 13 years proving himself in cars, including the 1993 Bathurst 1000 win, which had been the peak of it. There was, however, one thing about the Ford Mondeo that Hansford had to adjust to. It was a front-wheel drive car, which handled differently to anything he had raced before. While the Mondeo was a capable machine, such cars behave differently under hard cornering and braking than rear-wheel drive cars, and the tires needed heat in them to work properly. And on that cool March morning at Phillip Island, that detail mattered more than anyone in the paddock had anticipated. The coastal circuit was greeted by the kind of morning air that was typical for that time of year, but the paddock was buzzing with excitement. For Hansford, a beloved legend of Australian racing, the day started with a mixture of excitement and standard professional focus. Then at around 11:30 a.m. local time, the Super Touring race got underway, and the field set off around the 2.73-mile circuit. During the opening lap, Gregg's Mondeo was struggling to get the rear tires to any sort of temperature. It was a problem rooted in the nature of the car and the conditions that morning, and it was something that experienced touring car drivers had learned to manage carefully in cold or dry conditions. Nevertheless, Hansford drove the opening lap with the smooth composure that had been his trademark on 4 wheels, staying clean through the chaos of the opening corners and placing the Mondeo squarely among the leading pack as they crossed the start-finish line to begin lap 2. However, tragedy struck when approaching turn 1, which is commonly known as the Duhan corner, very fast right-hand corner after the start-finish straight. The incident started when Gregg entered the corner at close to 100 miles an hour and the rear of the Mondeo stepped out. What followed happened in a matter of seconds. The car snapped sideways, left the circuit, and slid across the grass at the inside of the corner, before striking the perimeter tire wall with enormous force. The impact itself was severe, but what the tire wall did next was what made the accident fatal. Rather than absorbing the energy of the Mondeo hitting it at that speed, the barrier acted like a rubber band, storing the kinetic energy and throwing the car back out, spinning it across the grass and directly onto the racing line. Moreover, the impact had kicked up a massive cloud of dust and debris that immediately filled the air across the track. And for the drivers in that pack that had been running close behind Hansford, visibility dropped to nothing in an instant. 26-year-old privateer Mark Adderton from Sydney was running in the pack in his Peugeot 405, carrying the speed the section demands, when the dust cloud swallowed everything in front of him. He had no warning, no reaction time, and nowhere to go. Coming from the cloud at approximately 80 miles an hour, the front of his Peugeot drove squarely directly into the driver's side door of Hansford's Mondeo, which had spun to present its left flank to the oncoming traffic. And since the Mondeo was a left-hand drive car, the impact came straight into the driver's door. There was no scenario in which that was survivable, as the T-bone collision was the worst kind of impact in motorsport. At that speed, the crash overwhelmed the level of side impact protection required under the 1995 Super Touring regulations. The frontal crash structures in touring cars of that era were well developed, but the side impact systems were nothing close to what the sport would eventually build. The Peugeot's nose collapsed the door panel inward, crushing the safety cage and bypassing the crumple zones entirely. Hansford was pinned inside the wreckage, where he received fatal chest and internal injuries. There was no hands device, no head and neck restraint of any kind, because Australian motorsport had not yet made them mandatory, and no amount of extraction speed was going to change what had already happened inside of that cockpit. Within minutes of the impact, race officials red flagged the race and emergency crews reached the scene, working with cutting tools to free Hansford from the wreckage, while the rest of the field came to a halt. Hansford was taken to the nearby hospital for further treatment, but looking at the severity of his injuries, there was nothing they could do. And just like that, shortly after the crash, Gregg was pronounced dead at the age of 42. Racing resumed more than an hour later. Paul Morris won both Super Touring races that day in his BMW, holding off Brad Jones by 0.01 of a second in the first race, and winning the second by 5 seconds. Nobody at Phillip Island that afternoon paid much attention to the results. David Tate of the Australian Confederation of Motorsport stood in front of cameras and said the accident at what was considered one of the safest motor racing venues in the world brought home the realities of the dangers in the sport. He was right, and it was exactly the right thing to say, and it still didn't come close to making any of it easier to process for the people who had been in that paddock when it happened. Hansford's body was brought home to Queensland, where his family arranged an Anglican funeral service in Brisbane, which was attended by the mechanics and team owners, Grand Prix rivals and touring car drivers, fans who had followed him since the 1970s, and friends who had known him long before any of that. As the news spread, tributes started pouring in from overseas, including people who had raced against him. In the aftermath of the crash, tire wall configurations were replaced with concrete barriers designed to deflect cars forward rather than throw them back into traffic. Gravel traps were expanded at circuits across the country, mandatory side impact bars and emergency absorbing door foam became requirements across touring car categories. And the man who owned the team that lost Hansford that day spent 7 years campaigning for HANS devices to become compulsory in Australia. In 2016, recognizing his contributions, Gregg Hansford was inducted into the Australian Motorsport Hall of Fame. It was long overdue, and the people who had been in the sport long enough to know what he had done understood that immediately. He remains the only man in history to win a premier race at Mount Panorama on both motorcycle and car. And looking back at his life, it's safe to say that he was the greatest natural talent of his generation. The quietly spoken tiger from Brisbane who never put on airs, never chased the spotlight, and never stopped being exactly who he was from the day he first sat on a motorcycle to the last morning he ever strapped on a helmet. The sport remembered him. It always does, eventually in the way that it remembers all the ones it takes. But the people who loved him didn't need a Hall of Fame or tribute article to remember Gregg Hansford. They just needed more time with him. And that was the one thing the sport could never give back. Rest in peace, Gregg Hansford.